Hello and welcome back to the next episode of the Mindset course. This week it's a subject that I could talk about for hours, and that is healing from diet culture and understanding where diet culture originates, why it originated, and why you do not need to worry about it, but rather focus on healing from some of the traumas and damage that it can do. This is about to be a whistle stop tour. There's going to be parts of this that are quick, that we are kind of just touching on, because in order to get everything in within a reasonable amount of time, I've only been able to touch on certain things for short periods. However, rest assured, I'm going to be doing a whole further thing, we'll call it, maybe course would be the right name, I don't know yet, that delves into each of these areas in much more detail, because the more we can understand, the more knowledge you have. They say knowledge is power. I really believe that. The more you can understand why we think the ways we think, but also why those thoughts are untrue. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our brain wants to be right, not happy. And a lot of the time, when you have taken on board false truths throughout your life, regardless of what that may be in which area, it's difficult to break them unless we can understand why they were given to us in the first place. So we can start rewiring our brains and think more objectively and more for ourselves. Because a lot of the time with subjects that we're going to cover today, diet culture and the like, they are things that have been given to us without us really understanding maybe motives behind it, and for that reason we take them as truth. And there's a lot of different areas where the things we are told are revalidated, making us believe them even more. So it's definitely a process, and it's not one that you're going to watch today's course and by the end of it you're going to be totally healed and diet culture is not going to bother you in the slightest ever again. I really wish it was. I'm still on this journey now, and every day pretty much I can have a thought come into my mind or think something or critique myself in a certain way, and I go, that is from diet culture and toxic ideas around women's beauty and women's worth related to their beauty and all the rest of it that we're going to get into. And by having this knowledge, I'm more able to catch myself in those moments and redirect and change the way that I am thinking. So hopefully by the end of this session, you're going to have a greater understanding as to the history behind dieting and explore the good, bad and ugly side of that, alongside kind of the opposite part of the coin, which is kind of body positivity and that movement, and how that could also have impacted your weight loss journey, your views on yourself and the rest of it, and hopefully reflect on the personal impact that diet culture and everything that we're about to get into has had on you, and maybe some steps that you can take to start making change in that area. So we're going to jump straight in with a whistle stop tour of the history of dieting. So dieting has existed for thousands of years, but not quite in the way we see it today. So dieting can be kind of traced right back to the ancient Greeks, where dieting and restriction of food or cutting out of certain types of food was done regularly, but much more for the physical and mental holistic benefits that it could have to a person. So not so much to do with weight loss. It was never kind of correlated with that per se, but it was used in a way to look at bettering somebody's health. So from way back when, we knew that there was that link between food and our bodies and how we felt. However, how we know like dieting today, the modern day dieting, we can kind of trace back to a lovely gentleman named William Banting. Now, he was a writer. He had no medical or kind of health background. However, he was a gentleman that was perhaps of a larger build and was experiencing some weird symptoms. Weird to him at the time. However, in modern day, we would see these as signs of potentially insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. Now, at the time, there was some very early research happening in France, which was linking how the body responded to starches and carbohydrates and negative impacts that it may have, and looking at what things people could do if they were experiencing that to alleviate their symptoms. Obviously, medicine was still in its infancy in this stage, so it was very much trial and error. And so, a medic had looked, or somebody in that sphere had looked at the issues people were experiencing. They had seen this correlation between starches and carbohydrates and how the body was responding to them in some individuals. And so kind of went to the other side of the kind of food eating spectrum and said, right, I think for these people, we should try eating a animal product based diet. So none of the grains or anything like that, all of the meat and dairy and eggs, and see if that helps. So it was a very, very infant keto style diet. And as we know, keto diets can work fantastically for people that are insulin resistant or are type 2 diabetic. And so it was no surprise that he went on to not only lose 35 pounds, being that he would have been on a ketogenic diet, but also that his symptoms were relieved. So this was the brainchild and kind of the catalyst for him to write down his experiences in a book. I don't know if we'd call it a book. I don't know how many pages a book has to be, but in a piece of literature that was available to the public named A Letter on Corpulence. And it was all about removing those kind of carby, starchy products from your diet and looking at living a more animal-based product lifestyle when it came to your eating. However, women were not thought to have the rigor for dieting during this time. They were seen to be too emotional, not able to regulate themselves, too hysterical, that dieting was just not for a female. And also, beauty standards at this time did not prioritize thinness. Rather, they liked plumpness, as it was associated with traits like wealth, motherhood, and sexual aptitude. As kind of olden times and backwards as it sounds, women really were seen for their fertile qualities. They were seen as, the reproducers of the human race, and at that point in time certainly were deemed as more second class to men. So men didn't want skinny, scrawny women because it was looked upon that they would not be able to either, one, bear them children, and two, it may have indicated that that woman was from a poorer background, being that anyone during this period typically that was of slimmer build was seen to be from a more poor background because maybe it was difficult for them to get food. Whereas if you were voluptuous and you were a bit plump, you were seen as having wealth, but also those good childbearing hips. So in the very early stages, dieting was literally something seen for men to improve their health and bring them back to this masculine, strong position. But women, it wasn't really aimed at them at all. Although in the 1980s, around this stage, early 1900s, women's magazines in America did start publishing some diet-related content. And that's kind of where the beauty standards within society started to take a bit of a shift. However, as with most things that we're going to discuss today, there was a quite dark undercurrent and reason behind why these media outlets were starting to give the message that maybe thinner bodies were better bodies. And I just want to give a little trigger warning to this section of the course that we are going to touch on topics of racism. If that's something you do not feel comfortable in kind of watching, then please skip forward a few minutes just whilst we cover this short section. However, I do feel like it's very important. So if you feel like you are in a place where it is not going to negatively impact you, then let's talk about why racism was a massive reason as to why American media outlets started publicizing dieting to the women of their society. So we cannot look at the history of dieting without addressing the racial ideologies of the early 1900s, which drove a real shift in the ideal body of the time, especially for women. Not only did this ideology shame and kind of, be completely disrespectful, derogatory, and just cruel to people of colour, it also encouraged white women to begin dieting as a way to differentiate themselves from the stereotypes of a Black woman's body or a woman of colour's body. The perceptions being they were more curvaceous or had, bigger hips or, bigger bums, whatever it might be, all those kind of stereotypes that people can have, those are being pushed out into the mainstream in order to get the public on board with these racist ideologies that the establishment, government, and the likes had, and to kind of put them out very insidiously into main society. And that is where dieting really kind of picked up, especially in America during that time. Obviously, there is a really dark history with America and racism and slavery. And I am not going to sit here and pretend to be well versed in, all of that history. However, I wanted to touch on it here because, again, the more knowledge you have on where these things start from, the more that you can critically assess the thoughts that you may have had passed to you, not from people that were racist or anything like that. But if we follow the chain back, we can see kind of where they started. And it's not something that we can just overlook whenever we're discussing about dieting, because it was definitely pushed out to, main society for women to diet in order to get the more slim, kind of straight up and down, not really much of a figure body types, because that differentiated you from that other portion of society that the establishment, the media outlets, the rest of it were demonizing and trying to really view as a second class citizen, and encouraging, the white female population to want to disassociate and differentiate themselves from that. And, body size then became another battleground for racialized and gendered ideals. And then we have the roaring 20s, which kind of pushed dieting into the spotlight and further promoted that body type. The flapper girl aesthetic was born, and I'm sure we all know the aesthetic. It is legendary. We've probably all gone to one too many fancy dress events as a flapper girl, and they embraced a really fiercely modern look. It idolized thin, youthful, and flat chested body types, whilst plumpness had been previously associated with wealth and sexuality. Thinness now reigned supreme, and only women who weren't desperate for food had the privilege of restricting their consumption for aesthetics. So if you were a flapper girl and you were able to not only be very, very thin, but also have your hair done, your makeup done, have a beautiful dress on, then suddenly the previous stereotype that being thin meant poor no longer fell into place, because the only reason that you would be able to look so glamorous and be so thin would be if you were wealthy enough to restrict your food, versus it not being an option and you just not having enough food available. And so that's kind of the warped thinking around it, and why that aesthetic and why that previous viewpoint and idea completely shifted as we went into the 1920s. Calorie counting was born shortly around this time, shortly before, after, couldn't get an exact date, but around 1918. Now, originally, calorie counting was a rationing technique for during the war. Now, Dr. Hunt Peters said that in wartime, it is a crime to hoard food. He was a doctor at the time of the war. And he went on to say, yet there are hundreds of thousands of individuals all over America who are hoarding food stored away in their own anatomy. Now, he was kind of the first to put out into mainstream that we could characterize fat people and their behaviors. So he was characterizing fat people in America as unpatriotic, threats to the future of the United States, because they would hoard food, a resource that was, so scarce and needed during that wartime. And that perception linked weight to those behaviors and values, just as often happens with race and gender gender and class and the ones that we've previously discussed. But it was one of the first times that there was a direct association between an individual's weight, regardless of the other things that we've discussed, that would be negative and, kind of encourage people to look upon these things negatively. Because how could you be patriotic and wanting to help, the soldiers and our country if you're going to eat all the food and kind of make it harder for us to have a fair share amongst society? So calorie counting was born during this time of rationing in order to figure out how much would people need food wise in order to sustain a healthy, ready for war body, or helping the helping the troops on the front line. So not necessarily linked to dieting, although it's something that then obviously carried forward and the purpose of it shifted as our environment and time shifted. Now, the 1940s through to the 1990s, there was a dieting boom. And that is no exaggeration. Every 5 to 10 years within this period, we could talk about how dieting changed, how there was new kind of fad diets, new ideas, everything from a soap that would wash away the lard, or cigarettes specifically designed to make you skinny, or even the use of things like amphetamines to help you lose weight, alongside, ice cream diets, cabbage soup diets, all of these other crazy things that, if we're honest, most of us have probably tried at least a handful of. And it really became commercialized during this period. And what really helped the commercialization of weight loss was the rise in television and celebrity. It was the first time that we kind of had access to a really wide pool of celebrity, because things like television was kind of born, print media was expanding, magazines that were more diverse, so magazines just for women or in certain kind of subcategories were coming up and about. And so for that reason, we started getting more celebrity figures. You think of the likes of Twiggy back in the 60s, Marilyn Monroe, looking at when the supermodel kind of was born as well. And again, all of these women had their bodies critiqued, whether that was that they were the absolute example of beauty, or whether it was that they were too big, and people had criticism regarding that. It was really around this time that the idea of thinness that had kind of developed earlier in the 1900s really cemented into place. And whilst there has always been some slight variations, and there's always some changes, 1 minute you want to have a tiny waist and a big bum, or the next minute it's all about the boobs, things always kind of came back to the fact that, yes, we want you to have boobs, we want you to be the Pamela Andersons of the world, but you need to also be very, very svelte. So, there was this really unrealistic expectation on women, and women were becoming commodities. Whilst we had got the vote, and whilst women's rights arguably had increased massively, at the same time, women's bodies and women within kind of that industry were seen as commodities. This is, around the time of things where Playboy was kind of born, and we had the likes of Page 3, and women's bodies and the expectations of women were very much through the male gaze. Women's bodies and the ideas of what a women's body should look like never really came from women. They came from men. However, women took them on board because of how media pushed it in your faces all the time. Even the likes of Stepford wife type woman back in the 1950s, that idea of being put together and not letting yourself go and all the rest of it. And again, it was so that your husband looked like he had the perfect family. You were part of that image. So I think it's important to understand that the ideas that we have around what makes the perfect body very much stem from women really being objects, which is a really hard thing to kind of accept. But women being, commodities, commercial entities, and, ways in which people can make money, rightly or wrongly. I mean, I think wrongly, but here we are. So it is a very, it's an important thing to remember when you're thinking about what you've been told you should look like or you should wear, where that's come from. It's not been from women wanting to bring women up and empower women. It has been from an industry that wants to put women against women, wants women to feel like they're not good enough in order to commercially profit off it further. Now, if we look at the kind of ideal image of a woman, and why hasn't that changed, and what's kind of driven it further down that negative path and had these little tweaks here and there, or the dieting has shifted, there's three kind of areas that we can look at that we will typically see whenever, whenever this is at play. So the first is that there's a social, economic, or political pressure to conform to ideal standards. So a good example of this, like I just mentioned, housewife of the 1950s, they very much had to look put together, like they were looking after themselves. And if they were put together, preemed, all the rest of it, then they had the perfect nuclear family. And nuclear family was something that post-war they really, really wanted to push. Obviously, they'd lost tens of thousands of soldiers during the war, and they needed to repopulate. They needed to bring the country back together again. They needed to increase the rates of new people, and they also needed to try and bring about a sense of stability and grounding and normality to a country that had been at war for the past few decades between the different wars that had been going on. Then we look to profitability and economic growth. The diet industry is worth billions, tens of billions, if not more. It's a very, very profitable industry. If you tweak something slightly, if you go, together with a celebrity to try and promote a new look, a new trend, a new style, whatever it is, you are going to profit from it. You can profit from changing the ideal beauty standards that are in our current environment. And that is always driven by making money, whether that's a new low-rise jean like was popular back in like the Britney and Christina Aguilera era, whether that was, the makeup of the 60s and 70s with Twiggy and her iconic eyelashes, or, women dyeing their hair blonde to look like Pamela Anderson or Dolly Parton. There's always products behind the ideal that they are selling. And so you will normally see that the profit and economic growth that can happen from this is huge. And then the development in media and growth in celebrity only helps facilitate that, because as celebrity became bigger and as media presences of people became greater within society, they were able to push these ideas. Those ideals were put onto them. And so the people behind those messages or behind those products didn't have to do very much, because people naturally aspired to be like these people that they were seeing. They aspired to their lifestyle. They aspired to the version of themselves that was promoted out on camera. We all know that that is very rarely a true, version of that person. However, it was very much put out there as, look how happy they are, look how beautiful they are, look how much people love them. I want to be like that. And that aspiration really drove the continuation of this cycle. Again, as the social and economic pressures change and the ideal beauty changes, and we have that desire to conform, there's generally a product there ready for us to use or access, and it will normally be being pushed through to us in society. A really modern example of that is the skinny jab. The celebrities started using the skinny jab, started getting really, really slim, even though, arguably they are not the suitable candidates for this medication to begin with anyway. There's that aspiration, there's the promises of quick fixes and kind of all the rest of it. And behind it, there's a massive pharmaceutical company that's making, millions, if not billions of dollars in profit as a result of these drugs. So I think you become much more skeptical as you watch things going forward as to why trends change and why things change. And that's not to say the skinny jab does not work. It absolutely will work for a proportion of people. However, I think the rapid rise in it and the pressures people have felt to access that product tell you that perhaps the cause behind it were not maybe as pure. But hey, I may be proven wrong, and it could be an absolute miracle drug for everyone. However, I think having that slight extra double double take whenever you see something or you feel that pressure. Think to yourself, like, where is this coming from? Like, where is the pressure to get this from? And we see it a lot on TikTok now. You know, one person starts using a product, it becomes viral and it's everywhere. And suddenly you're thinking, actually, I think I might need that. Whereas you've never maybe thought it before. And then suddenly a lot of your friends have it and then you feel pressured into getting it. But you've never wanted it before. But that social pressure can make you want to conform. That's a human quality. You know, we are not isolated species. We want to be part of a group. So that kind of innate desire to conform is there, and it is definitely exploited in this industry alongside all the other social pressures and all the other negative narrative that has been growing year on year on year throughout generations, and that we kind of just grow to believe to be true. But it isn't true. So this was a session I actually ran live with the girls in the group this week, but it's something that you can do yourself as well. I asked them all to think about their early memories of the ideal body, and maybe it was like adverts or experiences, maybe it was seeing people on diets, maybe it was just things that people in your close circle would say to you, and write them down and what these kind of made you think or feel. What was really interesting in the session was hearing from people who grew up during different decades and how they were all slightly different, but everyone had kind of similar ideals, but the very specifics were very much determined on that particular trend at the time, rather than perhaps this idea of, as a female, or as just as a person, what beauty is. And so I encourage you to do this because it was very interesting, and it might make you understand where some of those real formative memories, thoughts, and ideas that you have now have come from. So the rise of thin really, really started to happen in the 80s with the rise of supermodels. And then as television and kind of multi-channels started coming out, things like Sky, things like cross-Atlantic viewing, so we were able to start viewing content from, or TV shows from America. That really exploited this already very toxic world that we were all in. There are some examples here, and I'm sure so many of you can relate to so many of these things. I literally just thought for about 30 seconds, and these were the first ones that came to my mind, that all had a very negative view of larger people and a very dismissive view of struggling with obesity or struggling with food, that only further made you think that it's just your fault. I'm just lazy. I just can't do it. I just need to eat less. If you look at things like The Biggest Loser, for example, that was a prime example of the whole eat less, move more mindset. Now, the irony with it is that The Biggest Loser has to have some of the worst statistics for long-term weight maintenance I've ever seen in my life. However, we didn't see them a year, 2 years, 10 years later. We saw them at the finale. We saw those dramatic before and afters, and we were made to believe that this had completely transformed their life and they were just fitness freaks now who loved eating clean, and that was it. End of story. Gillian had beasted them long enough that she had literally beat the fat out of them, which couldn't be further from the truth. However, as an impressionable young person, you may have watched that, and if you already had this idea that we just eat less, move more, again, which was kind of given to us through media, even through things like advice from medical professionals, maybe you had it in school, from your parents. Again, this is continually reinforcing that idea. And then alongside that, you had the kind of TV and media that was that you're overweight, we need to shame you into being slim, like things like super size, super skinnies, fat families was just, I just can't. And then you had the other side, which was like that aspirational. So things like America's Next Top Model, look at these girls, they're so beautiful. And what is the one thing they all have in common? Oh yeah, they're ridiculously skinny. And if there was a girl that was even so much as just like, not even like normal, because they were all really slim, but say they had like size 0 girls as a standard, and then there was a girl that was like a size 4, then suddenly that is a plus size model, which it absolutely is not. But Janice Dickinson really did us dirty here and gave us some really, really negative critiques that I'm sure if you're like me, you remember. And then when you actually look back at those episodes now, it's shocking, to be fair. And that's something maybe to do. If there's any episodes of things that you watch that you remember, like you really remember that the impact that had on you, go back and watch it as an adult. Because when I went back and watched some of the America's Next Top Model episodes where they had plus size models, I was genuinely like, jaw on the floor, what the hell? Why did I ever think that was a plus size model? But also completely understandable now as to why I would always think that I'm not good enough, because if that's what's considered, she needs to go on a diet, then God only knows what Janice Dickinson would say about me. And then we also had this other side, which was almost this like demonizing of bigger people, and this kind of really negative connotation between people and their personality and their character traits. Now, I love like my 600-pound life as much as the next person. Dr. Now, I think, has his moments of absolute brilliance. However, what I will say is TLC are notorious at badly editing things. And I really feel like a lot of the episodes cast negative lights on the participants' personalities, whether that be that they're argumentative or they treat family members poorly or they're rude or whatever it is. There's always that kind of undertone in majority of the episodes. And then if we look to programs like Shallow House, it was a film that in itself, you watch back now and you're like, that's so problematic. Like, why did they ever think this was a good idea? And even the rise of things like the show Catfish, because there was always this thing that, you know, the catfish was going to be this bigger, not as like attractive person, and look at this horrible thing that they're doing to this lovely attractive person. Now in modern day, Catfish has got better. However, back in the day when it first came out, it really did reinforce that stereotype that the people that would be behind the keyboard, ruining someone's life and doing all the rest of it, was just some sad, fat, lonely person. And you know, if you look at this in its entirety, you start to really see how those negative ideas have been put into our head. And that's even before you've gone on a diet. That's even before you've tiptoed into the realm of what diet should I do. That is just from everyday media and things like that you're consuming. And this was before social media. This was just when we had like our MSN Messenger and our TV box. So again, by understanding all of these points of reference that you've had, you're going to be more equipped to be able to see why you think the way you think. And by having that awareness, you're more able to make changes to it. So in the session, I asked the girls what were their favourite TV programmes, magazines or media when they were younger, and how they felt that it influenced them. Again, this was really interesting because through different decades, there's been different types of media sources, there's been different things that have been really popularised. So again, I encourage you, have a think about it and maybe go back and watch some of those old episodes. Don't do it from a place of looking to be triggered or anything like that. But if you are able to watch through a critical lens, it could be really useful to watch that back and make notes of how your younger self perceived the episode and how your fully formed frontal lobe adult self watches, and what you think now maybe versus what you think then, and catch any thoughts that you have that you're like, that's interesting and slightly problematic that came into my head. Because again, it really helps us break down these thoughts that we have. So now we're going to come up to kind of modern day. This was probably started about 2015, 2016 time, was the body positivity movement. Now, I could go in on the body positivity movement, as in a deep dive into the background of it. However, there have been some excellent YouTubers that have done some incredible videos, really dissecting kind of where it came from and some of the not so great roots that it itself has been born from. This is not ironic that actually the body positivity movement can be traced back to another group of men who wanted more acceptance for liking bigger women. So again, another thing to do with women's bodies that comes back to men. I'm not even particularly like in the feminist world, but this kind of continual tracing back to a man making these ideas or having some part to play really started to get on my tits. So I think that it is interesting to look into. And again, knowledge is power and understanding things is very important. And so if you are like me and you enjoy going down the rabbit hole, I'm going to include some YouTube videos in this course so that you can go and watch them if you are interested. There is good and bad in everything, and knowing it can just help you form your own critical opinion of things. Arguably, the modern day body positivity movement kind of came to light as a result of Tess Holliday. She is an American or Canadian model. She was the first plus size model. She's a US 24, which is UK size 28. And she was the first plus size, especially, the first US size 24 model that was signed to a modeling agency. She's also, I believe, only 5'5". So it wasn't even just that she was larger than your typical plus size model. She was actually substantially shorter as well. So it really did make waves in the industry. Obviously, she is a beautiful woman. She's so glamorous, and it kind of battled against all of those stereotypes that we've kind of discussed that a woman with her body kind of should have. And it was really empowering. I remember myself during this time seeing her and thinking, wow, like she's the closest that I feel I have to representation. And she is so beautiful and she looks so glamorous. And it kind of started to fight back some of those thoughts that I had as in I would never be beautiful or be accepted or loved or anything like that because of my body and my size. And she really did kind of put two fingers up to that and say, that is not the case. Like, I'm here, I am beautiful, my body does not define me, my body does not define my health, and I really don't care what anyone has to say about it. And that message was so powerful after so many years of nobody almost having the bravery to come out with that. And not only just individuals having the bravery to come out with that, but publishers and media outlets. You know, Tess was the first plus size model to be on the front of a Cosmopolitan UK magazine. And it shook the industry with debates on both sides, whether it was right or whether it was problematic in itself. Cosmopolitan made it a bit more problematic by having the headline strong, fit, and 300 pounds. Obviously, the argument being, can you be strong and fit and healthy at that weight? But do you know what? It got the conversation started, and actually that is what needed to happen. And Cosmopolitan then went on to promote more plus size beautiful women within their publications, which was so beautiful to see, because it really started giving representation to normal women and, you know, not the kind of typical model that we were all seeing all the time. Now, there are some real positives about the body positive movement. And as I've just kind of touched on, it really started to promote that self-acceptance. It was promoting self-confidence and self-esteem, regardless of your size or shape. And like I said, personally, it really did have a positive impact on me. Don't get me wrong, it definitely didn't make me lose everything from before, and I definitely really still struggled. But there was a moment of like, oh my gosh, if people think that she's beautiful, then maybe they could think I am beautiful too. They probably did think that anyway, but alas, we move. It encouraged healthy behaviours from a standpoint that it really started to emphasise the importance of self-care and self-love and overall well-being as away from the scale and our bodies, which a lot of us lack. A lot of us lack the ability to truly care for ourselves, which is why so much of this course and what we talk about encourages that self-care, that self-compassion, because that is really the core of absolutely everything. In order to be, mentally well and arguably therefore physically well, we really have to prioritize and look after that, especially in a world that is so fast-paced with so much pressure and, kind of everything going against you. To have a really balanced and calm and happy mind, it's important that we give ourselves the time to work on that. And this started to encourage that much more. And it challenged beauty standards. It, without a doubt, made people question the beauty standards that we had. There had already been in the early 2010s a lot of negativity around the whole size zero phenomenon that had happened. There were a couple of really tragic incidents of models who had passed away during fashion shows and had very, very low BMIs. And there was a rampant issue of dysfunctional and disordered eating and eating disorders within that industry. And it was kind of just accepted for a long time, which is abhorrent. Like, it should never have been accepted. Again, these women were real women and they had families and lives, and they deserved to be looked after by the fashion houses and agencies that were using them to profit. And So there had already been this kind of pushback that started to happen. There'd been regulation put in place in order to try and maintain the health of models in the industry. And so there had been that slight pushback already to the kind of model physique that we'd seen a lot in the 80s and 90s. However, this really drove that forward and actually meant that a lot of companies and a lot of people were becoming pressured to, or putting pressure on, to show more diversity within media as a blanket, just more diversity of people within media. And another thing that the body positivity movement kind of did, therefore, by proxy, was promoted diversity as a whole. So yes, the body positivity movement was there to promote body diversity and acceptance of all bodies, but naturally that therefore meant that people of colour and people with disabilities or differences were starting to be included in some of these bigger campaigns by different companies and media. And so whilst it was kind of body positivity, there is an argument that there was a lot of positivity regarding just diversity as a whole when it came to the types of pictures, images, people that we saw in our media sphere. But as with everything good, there is always going to be some not so positives. And there is some not so positives with the body positive movement. Like I said, I'm going to put a really interesting video below, which gives you some of the background surrounding it, some of the problematic areas. I think body positivity is a really touchy subject to some people, and it's not something a lot of people like to talk out about, and the fact that there, could be negatives associated with it. But the truth of the matter is that there is, and we need to be able to face them in order to be able to take some positives from it, but also, be mindful of potential negatives that can come from it as well. So the first thing, and kind of the argument a lot of people had when Tess did her Cosmopolitan cover, was that it normalized unhealthy habits. As much as it really started to promote some healthy habits, it also started normalizing some really unhealthy habits. And it may have inadvertently caused people to have poor nutrition and a lack of physical activity because they're just focusing solely on accepting their body without addressing importance of overall health. So instead of us building in, health as a whole and looking at everything and bringing in our mental health and all the rest of it, we kind of completely got rid of the physical health aspect and only focused on these things. And I think in order to be truly body positive, we have to be caring and looking after our bodies first and foremost. And that was something that was kind of lacking in a lot of the messaging that was being given. As well, I think it caused a lot of confusion about health because there was so many mixed messages, and we'd had so many years of ridiculous diets, ridiculous health advice, and all the rest of it. I think whenever body positivity came around, it kind of left people in a place where they had no idea what the right thing was to do, because it was that, this emphasis on body acceptance regardless of size, it led to confusion about what constitutes a healthy lifestyle. So some individuals may interpret body positivity as an excuse to neglect their health, for example, or engage in unhealthy behaviors such as like binge eating, or maybe not address unhealthy eating habits because that's just what I fancied, and it doesn't matter what size I am. And yes, there is truth in that. But again, it's not a very balanced message. And that is what you'll find with most things. In most things where there is this real juxtaposition and this real objective to challenge and change the norm or a view on something, they usually go the complete stark opposite. And that in itself can be problematic. And the other issue with it that I don't like, as with most of this, and as we discussed earlier, there's normally a commercializable element to most of these things, and there definitely was with body positivity. And what that meant is that as body positivity became a bigger thing, it became a talking point, it sold magazines, people started aligning themselves to brands that they saw as being more body positive. It became a bit of a marketing tool without truly supporting the movement's core values. It kind of meant that message was diluted, and it undermined the original intent of the whole movement. And that means that you can kind of start to question yourself, society's true view on what body positivity is or their true view on your body. You know, if a brand is saying that we're body positive, we love all bodies, but actually maybe in some of the messaging that they put out or some of the campaigns they run, or just generally even very openly, they perhaps don't really value that. They don't potentially value that as a important thing, or the message that's being given, you can suddenly question it and be like, well, if they're saying they're body positive but they clearly aren't, then how many people are saying that they don't care what people's bodies are like, but actually they do? So it can just make you question and become more insecure, which is the complete opposite of what this was intended to do in the first place. So some other potential negative impacts of the body positivity movement is it can increase shame. So if you're someone who has felt shame because you have struggled with your weight, and then shame because you've not been able to lose weight, and then further shame because you haven't been able to accept your body as it is, it can just lead to a more negative path with your mental health. And that can also lead then to isolation. If we feel like I don't fit in that group of people who are just, you know, can lose weight and be successful, I also don't fit in these people who have never had weight issues, and I also don't fit in this group of people that are just accepting their bodies, you can feel like you are even more isolated. And isolation is one of the worst things that any human can feel. Feeling alone is terrible, and feeling like you are the only person who suffers with something is massively detrimental to you ever being able to, you know, heal and move forward from that, which is why the community that we have is so important to me, because it gives us the opportunity to share and to speak and to realize that we aren't alone and that so many of us face the same issues. There can also be a increased concern around judgment. So since the body positivity movement has kind of built, I would say that it probably hit its peak in like 2018 to 2020. Since then, I would say body acceptance potentially has maybe become more widely promoted. Body positivity is there, but I definitely think it has potentially changed as well in kind of its viewpoint. However, it has also brought out this big wave of people who can feel as if you're losing weight, then you are very like internally fat phobic. You losing weight and the act of you being on a diet is you kind of further stigmatizing and being negative towards people who look to remain in larger bodies, which we all know couldn't be further from the truth. But that fear of judgment, you know, if you think if I go on to plan and I know a friend who potentially has got a similar body to me, are they going to suddenly feel like I think that they are too big and need to be on a diet? And that's never it. These things are so personal. But even that extra layer of judgment can make this whole experience and this whole process so much more difficult, and it can open you up to so much more self-sabotage, so many more conflicting emotions, and difficulty to be open and honest with those around you with how you're truly feeling, for fear of upsetting or offending those that you're speaking to about it. And then there's the health impacts. So not addressing obesity can cause further health complications, both physically and mentally. And that is just a fact. Yes, there is evidence to suggest that you can be very healthy whilst being overweight. But once we become obese, we know that health really can decline. And once BMIs typically are over 40, other than in like rare circumstances, your weight will, even if not now, in the future, if your weight continues to be at that level, will negatively impact your health. And obesity impacts your body in every way imaginable. Can't get my words out. I'm getting too passionate about this. Whether that be cardiovascular health, lung health, mobility issues, things like sleep apnea. It can even impact brain conditions, neurological conditions. It can be the cause of certain cancers, or for certain underlying conditions to progress at more rapid speeds and have more unfortunate outcomes. So by us not addressing that, we can be going down the road for really kind of scary and in some cases preventable health conditions. And there have been a number of prominent body positive influencers and people who spoke about this who sadly have passed away over the last few years as a result of health complications to do with their obesity. And I think that is a real thing for people to look at and address and speak about, because until this point, the argument had always been that they could be, people could be healthy at every size. And a lot of the people within the body positive movement were quite young and, very vivacious and glamorous. And so at the point at which these individuals very sadly started succumbing to the disease that is obesity, it really shook up the body positive movement and the message that had been kind of spread for so many years. Now, during the session, I did ask if you had had any experience of body positivity and what they were. Were they positive, negative? Have they kind of impacted you? Again, because I think it's important that we look at the impacts that anything to do with a narrative around how our bodies should look and how we should feel about our bodies is addressed. So if we've looked at kind of the diet industry and the negative connotations or how experiences have impacted us from that side of the coin, we also have to look at the other, right? So it's something that's quite interesting to just look at and think about and reflect. We don't need to go deep down rabbit holes and start getting to the absolute core reason, but even just having a think and being like, that is so interesting that I think like that, can really, really help and be really, really beneficial to us taking the steps in order to start moving through this process and empower ourselves to actually realize that, do you know what? I am enough. I am beautiful, how I am. And it really doesn't matter what society has to say about my stretch marks, my lumpy bits, what I'm wearing, and whether something is, this word, flattering. Ugh. Honestly, we're getting healing. Let's go. Here is how we can start this healing process. The first is to allow emotions. This is going to be a really emotive thing for you to think about, to talk about, to journal about. However you're looking at processing it, it is going to bring up emotions. There's going to be emotions that you've buried deep because they were really painful at a time. Maybe there was embarrassment or shame or frustration or anger. You have to let yourself have those emotions and not attach more negativity to the fact that you felt them or that you're not allowed to feel them because you are this, that, or whatever. Let those emotions kind of be. Focus on health and not just weight. I think I've said this in every session now, but it is so important. This is about our health. The plan itself that obviously I'm passionate about and I work with is scientifically based. It was based purely with this idea of improving people's health. It wasn't a vanity product. It was a product that was brought to market to help people improve their health. And that was where all their clinical trials and the trials that enabled it to be linked so positively with reversal and remission of type 2 diabetes, or get the backing of Diabetes UK or British Heart Foundation, it all came from this place of improving health. And so I think aligning with a plan or a diet or anything like that has that focus is really important. But then also actively looking at ways that you can improve your whole health holistically, not just one little segment of it, is absolutely key. Build up your support network. Again, I think I say this every week. Get that community, talk, share, be brave. I know it can be really scary, but even just going on Instagram with a completely private profile with Mickey Mouse as your avatar, it doesn't matter, but being able to have conversations in things like the comments, in the group chats, really, really will help. And even just viewing content, just listening to other people's stories will make you feel a lot less alone. Work towards body acceptance over body positivity, in my opinion. Obviously, you choose your own journey. I am here to give advice, but I am not here to tell you that everything that I say is absolute gospel truth. These are, my opinions on a matter that is subjective and open to a lot of critical thought and criticism. In my opinion, I feel like body acceptance is a much more achievable, attainable, and arguably healthy place to be than body positivity. If you lived your whole life hating your body, tearing yourself to pieces, it's very big pressure to put on yourself to say that you should love it. Actually, our bodies should be looked at almost neutrally and just looked at as vessels that help us enjoy the beautiful moments in life and that we need to care for and look after. But putting, really strong emotions, and again, it's two sides of a coin. You either hate ourselves or I've got to love myself. No, let's try and work towards somewhere in the middle. Challenge toxic diet culture ideas and thoughts. If you're having them, challenge them, because the only way that we're going to be able to move past them is if we start showing our brain that the truth that it thinks is actually a lie, and we need to start rewiring it to actually believe a truth rather than someone's opinion or some fantasy idea that's been put out there. Practice self-care and self-compassion. Again, it'll be on every week's session probably, but really make that a priority. It's not like wishy-washy, like airy-fairy. Like, that is so important. Literally, tiny little self-care steps every day is going to make such a difference to how you feel about yourself. If you can give yourself 2 minutes, even just 2 minutes a day, that is starting to show yourself that you matter and that looking after you matters. And that is really important. And then redefine your vision of beauty. If you had to think about the people in your life that you think are absolutely beautiful, I would argue that very few of the qualities that you think make them beautiful are physical. If I think about my best friend, she is so beautiful to me because she has got the most loving heart you'll ever find. She is one of the most loyal people I have ever known in my life. She is hilariously funny. She is everyone's hype girl. She sees the beauty in every single person within her life. She's also not afraid and has the ability to be very honest, which I think is such a beautiful quality, to be so unapologetically honest, but with such a care in her delivery of that honesty if you need it. You know, I love her smile. She's got the most beautiful eyes. She has got, I mean, this is physical, but she has got the most amazing legs. She's literally super, super tall. So me, I've got little 26-inch legs. She's got super long legs. So yes, I look at that and think that is beautiful. That's nothing to do with the size of her legs or the size of her body. I love how confident she is within herself, and so she should be. And, you know, those things are far outweigh any, like, I love the fact that she wears a size X, or I love the fact that she's got this or that about her body. We're not typically friends, or we're not typically like married or in partnerships with people because those physical attributes, you know, like beauty is so much deeper than that. You know, one of the, you know, most beautiful things about her was how she cared and held my hand through the loss of my mum. And, you know, that is something that I will always look to her and think, that is such a beautiful thing about you, that you, in that moment, you just knew how to navigate me and help me through that. And so it's really important that you start redefining your idea of beauty, because beauty should not come from a group of men or someone who's profiting from your lack of feeling beautiful. Instead, you create your own. And once you've created your own, you can start actually seeing the beautiful qualities that you hold and what make you so beautiful. So how we can start rewiring those thoughts. So this is a little activity that can just help you rewire some of the thoughts that you have from a thought into reality. Now, this will probably take a little bit of work and it could be a little bit annoying, but you could do it on your phone notes, you could do it in a notepad. But I promise you, if you start doing this, you're really going to start breaking those down. So a thought is just what it sounds like. It's a thought. What comes into your head? Are you wearing an outfit and you think, oh, I knew I shouldn't have worn stripes, they always make you look bigger? Write that down. If you think to yourself, oh, I could never wear that, my legs, I'd look awful, you write that down. If you have a thought like this one, fat people are lazy, you know what you're going to do? You're going to write that down. And then we're going to look at the impact that that thought has on you. So me being told or having this idea that fat people are lazy, that could therefore be making me feel like I am lazy. If someone calls me lazy, do I then think they're calling me fat, for example, right? And then you go, but I try so hard. Like, I'm never good enough. I'm never going to be good enough because fat people are lazy and therefore I am lazy, I am fat, and it's a vicious circle, right? But the reality, and what's really important with this is that we then separate ourselves from that emotive thought and instead go, well, actually, the reality is that obesity is just a chronic condition. It doesn't mean someone's lazy at all. It means that someone's suffering with obesity. You know, there will be obese, lazy people. There will be skinny, lazy people. In the same way, I can wear stripes. It doesn't make me look any bigger or smaller wearing stripes. It doesn't matter if I look bigger or smaller. Who am I concerned about looking bigger or smaller for? If I like stripes, I can wear stripes. That is the reality of it. The reality is I can wear whatever I want, and the world is not going to end. And so by thinking about these things, and if you don't know what the reality is, use something like ChatGPT and be like, look, I think this. Can you give me what the reality is, please? And get that little bit of clarity. Ask a friend, message me. I think sometimes being able to get the reality of these thoughts, it almost shocks you because you're like, that is so true. Why do I think in this way? So that is where the external support can be useful in this activity. However, there'll be lots of them that you probably know the reality yourself. But our brains are locked in on what it feels like is a truth. Your brain wants to be right, not happy. And so it will continue to reaffirm to you fat people are lazy unless you start putting in place changes to the way that you think and, putting a mirror up to that thought and being like, no, that you're not right. You're not right. This is right. And did you know that actually, if you look to rewire your thoughts, and we do it through the speaking or writing down, generally it is thought it takes around 400 times for that thought to change. However, you can cut that down to just around 40 times by bringing play or action to what you're saying. Now, all play means is action in this instance, but it would mean, for example, say you were saying to yourself, big people can't wear stripes. I can't wear stripes because they make you look big. And then we've realized that means that we never wear stripes. We love a striped top, and it's really impacted our confidence in wearing lots of other clothes because we've got all of these like fashion rules in our head that we've been fed. And the reality is I can wear whatever I want because I can. No one actually cares that much. And so how I can make that become an even stronger reality to myself is start wearing whatever I want. Yes, it'll probably feel uncomfortable. Yes, you'll probably be checking yourself a lot during the day. But you know what? Every time you do check yourself all day, you say to yourself, I'm wearing stripes. I look at Lesh. I love this top. And you know what? People probably compliment you on it as well, which is the best thing. And the more that you do that, the more you're going to change that thought, and it's going to have a more powerful impact into that rewiring process because you've taken action alongside telling yourself something. Actions speak louder than words, and it's not just to do with other people. That works for our minds as well. So always look for action that you can take. So your homework for this week is to create a thought diary to help you identify and start rewiring your thoughts from negative to positive, or not even that, from opinion to fact. And a bonus point, if you want to send me those throughout the week for some extra accountability and affirmation. We are always going to make more progress when we have what we're doing affirmed and we're told, yes, you're right. So please do send them over to me. An extra little bit of homework that I set in the live session, and that I really want to encourage to you as well, is to go back to when we were thinking about those visions of beauty and the beautiful things in people that are not anything to do with like aesthetics or looks or anything like that. And I want you to give them that compliment this week. I want you to compliment as many people as you can for non-aesthetic reasons. I don't want you to tell them their makeup look good. I don't want you to tell them their hair looks good, or you like the way their bum looks in a dress, or anything like that. I want you to give them true compliments on why you are so grateful and love having them in your life, or why you are so appreciative of something that they have done for you. It's something that we really don't do enough of, is give those compliments that are true compliments, or true acknowledgements of why we like adore people and want them around. But the more we start giving them out, the more we start to recognize how much weight is actually held in those qualities versus what somebody looks like. So if you really want to supercharge this kind of process, then taking back that control and empowering yourself and making someone's day, like making someone feel incredible. Imagine if you woke up to a message from someone that said that was just so lovely. It would really, really make your day, your whole week, and it could help you really start that process for yourself. So that is the extra homework that I really, really encourage you to do. And we're going to end on this lovely quote from Jamila Jamil. Jamila Jamil is a brilliant advocate of body neutrality or body acceptance. And she said, stop calling yourself fat. You have fat. You also have fingernails, but you're not fingernails. And this is really important to remember. Like, even if you are struggling with obesity and you have your whole life and you have been called fat several times in several different ways by several different types of people, that does not make you that. You are not fat. You just have extra fat cells in your body that can impact your health negatively, and as a byproduct could have impacted your self-esteem and mental health negatively. But you are not that. You can have control over that, and you can manage that obesity. And that's what we're here to do. All of this is to help you be able to better tackle and manage weight issues so you can lead the happiest, healthiest, most balanced life possible for you, free from the chains and negativity and, quite frankly, to some extent, trauma a lot of us have faced after years of struggling with our weight. Hopefully, after this session, you are feeling empowered, you are feeling more knowledgeable, you are feeling like a fire has been lit that you now want to go and explore this topic further, which I really hope you do. And like I said, I'm going to put some resources alongside this session that you can go and explore and kind of take your own journey into where you want to go with this. Everyone's experiences are going to be so unique. So there's going to be different types of areas that you potentially want to look into. But I'm going to put some of my favourites down below, and hopefully following on from this, not only has that fire been lit, but we have a better understanding now of the history of dieting and how we ended up here. Like, how did we get here? Hopefully we get that now. And we've also been able to explore some of the positive and potential harm of body positivity, and just to always maintain that kind of critical viewpoint for information that we're being given, and reflected on the personal impact that diet culture and, you know, this whole kind of area of a lot of our lives has had. But we now have some steps to support us in healing through our current weight loss journey, and also an understanding that the two things are not kind of isolated. You know, we can be on a weight loss journey whilst also looking to remove some of those toxic thoughts that we have. And actually, if we can make this health weight loss journey much more holistic and encompassing like all of the areas that are related to our weight struggles, that's where we can make real magic happen. And that is where the real changes can happen that are sustainable for you long term. I have loved this session. I'm not going to lie, creating it, talking to you all about it, going on the live session with the girls. It's something that I am so passionate about. And so I really, really hope that you have enjoyed it and that you feel that you can take value. Like I said, there were a lot of topics that I felt we kind of had to cover in this session because it is such a huge area. However, if there are any particular areas that you would really like more information on, you would like more dedicated sessions to, let me know. Or if there's one part of this session that you're like, Rach, I need the deep dive on X, Y, or Z immediately, let me know. And then I can kind of figure out and prioritize which ones I cover off first. Thank you, as always, for joining me for this session. We'll be back next week for the 5th installment of the Mindset course. The penultimate course, the last one, will be the week after. So make sure that you join us. Please do join us live if you can. If you haven't got the link to the live sessions, then just drop me a message and I will send them over. And I will see you all very soon. Bye.